I'm Dr. Jim Taylor, and welcome to Prime Family Alert. This segment of Prime Family Alert focuses on raising compassionate children. Because of the messages of selfishness and disregard for others that popular culture communicates these days, your children aren't likely to learn compassion on their own. You must nurture the ability to care about others in their early years. If the value of compassion isn't evident in your daily lives, your children aren't likely to develop compassion and will ultimately become emotionally and socially disconnected from the larger world in which they live. Only when children are immersed in a compassionate world will they come to see the value of compassion and embrace it as their own. Compassion is a word that's bandied about often these days as a value du jour in our big talk, no action culture of values. Yet, as with most values that are co-opted by a particular agenda, compassion has lost its fundamental meaning and value to people. Thus, the importance of compassion in our lives is not fully appreciated, nor is it often expressed in our daily lives. Developing compassion starts with the recognition that we are not isolated creatures, but rather individuals who are part of many groups, communities, races, religions, nationalities, and citizens of planet Earth that must coexist to survive. This realization leads to an awareness of others, who they are, the culture in which they live, what they believe, how they live their lives, and the challenges that they face. Compassion provides us with a context in which we realize that people are more alike than they are different. We all want to be healthy and happy, safe and secure, and feel connected. We work, we play, we raise families. Compassion enables us to feel empathy for others and to put others' needs ahead of our own when necessary. Consider the alternatives to compassion: hatred and indifference. A person with hatred wishes the worst for people and lacks empathy or concern for others. A person who's indifferent doesn't care about another person or group and won't reach out to help others. A hateful or indifferent person is truly disconnected from humanity, both their own and others. At the heart of compassion is a thought: I am not alone in the world. An emotion: I feel for others and others feel for me. And an action: how can I help others? That propel us to want to give ourselves to others. Your challenge is to encourage the value of compassion and to provoke in your children those thoughts, emotions, and actions that bring compassion into their lives. If you lead a compassionate life, your children will naturally see its importance to you and will assume its importance for themselves. Leading a compassionate life is communicated to your children in both obvious and subtle ways. Your children, particularly when they're young, will most notice the larger acts of compassion in which you engage. For example, volunteering your time for a worthy cause, or traveling a long distance to support a family member in need. But as your children grow older and begin to grasp the concept of compassion, they'll also see the smaller expressions of compassion, such as comforting them when they scrape their knee, assuming dinner duties when your spouse is stressed out from work, or helping a neighbor with a home project. Encourage the value of compassion by talking to your children about compassion. Tell them what compassion is and why it is important to your family and the world as a whole. Because compassion is at its core an emotion, you should describe what compassion feels like, an urge to do good for others, and how it feels to act compassionately. It's satisfying, joyful, and inspiring. To show your children why compassion is so important, you can talk to them about the consequences of compassion, connectedness and meaning, or the lack of compassion, as I've talked about, hatred and indifference. The way to really make this discussion at home is to give your children examples of compassion in the world at large, as well as examples of lack of compassion. Point out ways in which your children can express compassion in your family. For example, being kind to their siblings. You can also highlight ways they can show compassion toward their community, such as donating old clothing to charity. To give them an even broader perspective on compassion in the larger world, you can show them events in the news, such as relief efforts in a poor country. Finally, you want to establish expectations about compassion in your family. These expectations should clarify what compassionate behavior is you expect and attach appropriate consequences for violations of those expectations. Educating your children about the value of compassion is not a one-time discussion. Rather, it's an ongoing dialogue in which you regularly engage your children about compassion and weave compassion into the very fabric of your daily lives. A quality newspaper, magazine, or website will often have many examples each day of compassion and hatred and indifference occurring throughout the world. You can further engage your children with more extensive resources, for example, books, films, and lectures that describe acts of compassion that give your children the opportunity to more fully appreciate all sides of compassion. The important part of exploring compassion is to evoke in your children the positive emotions associated with compassion: love, empathy, kindness, pride, and the painful emotions associated with hatred, anger, fear, sadness, and the complete absence of emotions related to indifference. You're not, of course, the only influence in your children's lives. Extended family, peers, teachers, coaches, and others affect your children on a daily basis, as does, of course, popular culture. Though you can't maintain complete control of your children's social lives, you can exert a considerable influence over the critical mass of people around them. Making deliberate decisions about who you surround your family with can help you ensure that your children get the messages of compassion from others in their immediate world. As your children become more increasingly immersed in popular culture and more vulnerable to peer pressure, assuming an active role in shaping your children's early social environment is particularly important. By surrounding your children with compassionate people, you increase the chances that peer influence and other social forces later in childhood actually support the value of compassion. As your children gain an understanding of the value of compassion, you can further deepen their connection by having them actually engage in compassionate activities. These activities can include, for example, encouraging acts of compassion within your family, such as helping a sibling frustrated with her homework, or being extra loving when you come home from a hard day at work. Sharing activities outside the home that help others, such as participating in a food drive during the holidays, or tutoring younger children. Discussions about these experiences, sharing stories about what each member of your family did, who they met, and how they might have helped someone, and what emotions it evoked in them, all help to clarify and deepen the meaning of compassion in your family's lives. Compassion fosters other essential values that will not only serve your children in their later lives, but more basically, help them become just plain decent people. Popular culture, unfortunately, doesn't hold decency in particularly high regard. It generally associates decency with being a wimp, a loser, a pushover, or just a sucker. Yet raising your children to be decent will not make them soft or easy. To the contrary, decent people are strong, independent, and willful. But these qualities are reflected in acts of compassion and goodness, rather than attitude and aggressiveness. What separates the good from the bad is not their power, but rather the values underlying that power and how that power is exerted. The bad guys use it for selfish, greedy, and often destructive purposes. Decent people use those values for positive and life-affirming ends. Two of the values that emerge from compassion are kindness and generosity. Kind children are gentle, considerate, and sympathetic. They're responsive to others' needs, helpful, and motivated to do good. Compassionate children are also generous and willing to give of themselves to others. What makes compassion, decency, and kindness and generosity so wonderful is that they're returned many times over, so that both the giver and the recipient benefit. I'm Dr. Jim Taylor for Prime Family Alert.